To be able to become still internally is a great gift. To be without the stress and annoyance of the world is a great gift. To be content and satisfied with the moment that we are in is a great gift. Yet, we overlook very often the majesty of those sublime moments when we are without worry, when we are without stress, when we are without the suffering that comes from our attachment to the world. We should treasure these moments of stillness. We should treasure these moments of quiet. We should treasure these moments of release from the anxieties of the world. And we should recognize that it is possible for us to stay in those moments. It is possible for us to be in that state for longer and longer and longer periods of time. Once we know that stress-free environment, once we know that environment without suffering, we should be able to repeat it over and over again until it becomes who we are. Now, what happens is that very often we drift and we lose touch with who we are. But if we set an intention to get back to that place and keep that intention, Allah will return us to that place. One of the draws that the Sheikh has towards his disciples and with his disciples is the fact that sitting in his presence brings about a kind of peace that isn't found in the rest of the world. For many of us, the first time that we met him, we encountered this stillness and this peace, and it was something we'd been looking for most of our lives, but had never seen, had never been in the presence of, had never encountered. And we learned very quickly that what he had, what he was giving off, that resonance, that flow, that peacefulness was available to us if we would enter into that state that he was in. If we would begin to imitate his actions, imitate his way, take on his persona, take on the way he did things. A man was going to the airport and he got out of his hotel in Manhattan and got into a cab, and the cab drove off to take him to the airport. A man who was parked in another car pulled out in front of the cab and the cab had to slam on the brakes and swerve not to cause an accident. The person who was in the parked car who had caused all of this difficulty turned his head out the window and began to scream at the cab driver as if the cab driver had done something wrong. The cab driver looked at the man, smiled, and waved. Eventually, their paths untangled and they were no longer near each other. And the man who was in the back seat said to the cab driver, "How were you able to do what you did? How did you react the way that you did? What is it that you understand that allowed you to be able to act this way?" And the man answered that it has to do with the theory of garbage trucks. A lot of people carry garbage trucks with them, and everywhere they go, they unload their garbage. There's no discretion as to where they unload their garbage. They don't go to garbage dumps. They just drop it wherever they are. Well, we as individuals who have this garbage dumped on us have to understand that it's nothing personal. These people are just carrying garbage and they have to release it somewhere. So we have to be able to sustain the nature of the way garbage is released in this world and move on without reacting, move on without taking it personally. This is a level of understanding that brings you to that peaceful state. This is a level of understanding that takes you outside of the realm of anger, outside of the realm of resentment, outside of the realm of reaction, outside of the realm of revenge, and allows you to move on. Can we understand that the actions of others are not part of who we are? And do we understand that if we react to the actions of others and become overwhelmed by what they do for us, then their actions do become part of who we are because we've taken them on? So can we develop a way not to take them on? Can we develop a way to release ourselves from these kind of interactions? Can we learn to let go of our anger? Can we let go of our need to react? This is a level of wisdom. It's a level of maturity. A horse has a short tail. When flies are biting a horse, the horse can't do much about it and has to sustain that. A cow has a much longer tail. And when insects are biting a cow, the cow can swipe away the insects in a much easier way. Can we develop a way to swipe away the insects that are constantly trying to bother us? Can we understand a way to let these minor irritations not become our life? Because this is a choice that we are constantly in the midst of making. Do irritations become, and our reactions to these irritations become our life? Or have we found a way not to be irritated? Have we found a way not to get angry? Have we found a way not to react? There was a woman who was a devotee of the Buddha. And every day, 2 times a day, she would recite the name of the Buddha over and over for an hour. But she was an angry woman. And all of this recitation did nothing for her state of anger. And she had a neighbor who was a wise man, and he knew about her state of anger, and he knew about her recitation every day. And her name was Mrs. Lee. And the neighbor knew when she started the meditation because she always rang a bell. So he came over to her house and stood outside her door just as she began. And as she began reciting the name of Buddha over and over and over, he began screaming, "Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee." And the woman doing the recitation heard all this, and it was bothering her meditation. And she was becoming angrier and angrier internally, but kept reciting. And the man continued to scream, "Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee." Finally, she got up and walked to her front door and looked at the man and said, "Why are you continually screaming my name? It's making me so angry." And he said, "Really? I've only been screaming your name for 10 minutes and it's made you angry. You've been screaming Buddha's name for years. Imagine how angry he's become." This is the point about prayers that are empty. If there's no real feeling in things, if you're not making a true connection, what's the point? You can be screaming the name of God over and over and over, but if the anger resides within you, if the anger hasn't passed, if you haven't found that point of stillness, if you haven't found that point of serenity, if you haven't found that point of surrender, what in fact are you doing? And what in fact is the point? So we, each of us, need to constantly be in a state of examination of our own level of serenity, of our own level of composure, of our own level of stillness, of our own level of calmness, of our own level of being able to go on with our existence without being subject to all of the whims of the world. And that's an important concept to understand. Are we subject to everything that goes on around us? Are we subject to all of the haphazard illusions of the world? Are we subject to everything that crosses our path? Are we subject to everything that we see? Does everything that we see or encounter have an effect on us? Driving is a test of patience and also a test of your ability to maintain your equilibrium in a situation where people are testing your ability to maintain your equilibrium. In many countries, including the US, road rage is a common occurrence. People lose control because other people somehow offended them while they were driving. They cut them off, or they drove too close to them, or something. And what happens is, and this is the part that's interesting, is people react as if it were something personal. I have been with drivers who, when I was being driven, and sat in the back seat, and certain drivers would constantly be in a state of talking to all of the people who were driving around them. How could he do this to me? How could he do that to me? Look at that person and the way he's doing that. There was a constant critique of what was going on around them. Now, this critique doesn't just happen when we're driving. This critique is part of how the mind works. And the mind, if it gets into that state, if it becomes overly critical, will begin to criticize everything around it, either in a good way or in a bad way. But the point is, the mind is incredibly judgmental. And if we walk with the mind in its critical state and allow that critique to continue to go on, and we fall victim to associating with that critique, we walk around judging the entire world. I was at a gathering one time, and one person began to talk, and they were being incredibly critical about certain people and about the way certain people did things. And then somebody who was a little wiser than them said at the gathering, he spoke up and he said, "And next, are you going to tell us who's worthy to go to heaven and who's worthy to go to hell?" This is the point. Judgment is not ours. Judgment belongs to Allah. And if we want to stay in that still place, if we want to stay in that place where we have contentment within us, we can't go around judging other people and being critical of everything around us. We have to leave it to Allah. We have to leave it to God. And one of the things that we can learn is the less we get involved with what surrounds us, the more peaceful we can be, the more content we can be, the more at peace we become. Now, it depends what you're looking for. Are you looking for peace, or are you looking for confrontation? Some people aren't happy unless they're in the midst of confrontation. They're not looking for peace. They're looking for confrontation. And they develop a style where they fight, and they think that there's something positive about that style. There was a Buddhist monk who always spoke from the heart, and many people came to see him from all over. And there was another monk nearby who was losing people who came to see him to this man, and he was getting angry about it. And finally, he decided to go visit the monk who was bringing all these people to him, and said, I'm going to go visit him. And he did. And he walked into his chamber and he screamed at the top of his lungs, "So and so, what is it that you have that makes people listen to you? Is there anything special about you?" And the man, the monk who was revered, called him and said, "For this kind of conversation, you need to come closer to me." So he came up to him and he said, "Well, what makes people listen to you?" And he said, "Well, I can't hear you that well. Sit on my right." And he sat on his right. And he said, "No, maybe you should move to the left." And he moved to the left. And they said, "No, maybe you should just sit in front of me." And he sat in front of him. And the way that he talked to the visiting monk was with such a gentle voice, in such a calm way, that the angry monk became still, became passive, and began to do exactly what he said. And the monk, the other monk, all of a sudden realized that it was the nature of this monk that people were coming to, which was the reason they were coming to him. They were coming to him because he expressed a peace and a stillness and a calmness that overwhelmed their beings and brought them into a state of peace and calmness. And he felt the same thing happen to him. And he immediately apologized for his arrogant behavior and had learned a great lesson. We, all of us, need to learn the great lesson of being still. We need to learn the great lesson of being content. We need to learn the great lesson of not having to be anywhere else but where we are right now. When's the best place to meditate? Now. Where is the best place to meditate? Here. Everything is here and now. And if we can bring ourselves into here and now and be content with here and now, our life will become much easier. A farmer was getting older and he needed some help on his farm. So he went into town to look for somebody to help him. And he got to the main square of the town and there was a young man there. And he said to him, "Do you need work?" And the young man said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, what are your skills?" And he said, "I can sleep soundly through the night, even though there's a storm." And he thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "Well, what else can you do?" And he repeated the same thing again. "I can sleep soundly through the night, even though there's a storm." So he thought, well, this doesn't make much sense. And he walked around the town trying to find somebody to help him on his farm. There was nobody. Finally, he came back to the young man and says, "I've decided, if you want, that I'll hire you to work on my farm." And the boy said, "Well, that's good. I need work." And he went with him and he gave him certain chores to do. And there were so many things to do at the farm that he didn't really have time to watch what the young man was doing. And weeks went by and everything seemed to be in order, but he never really watched the young man. Then one night, there was a terrible storm. It was so bad that the farmer began to become afraid that all of the barn doors would be blown open, that the animals would escape, that the wheat and all the grains that had been harvested would be ruined. So he ran to the room where the young man was sleeping and tried to wake him up. And he couldn't wake him up. So finally, he ran outside to the barn and he found all the doors had been locked in a very secure way. All of the animals had been put away in a very secure way. Everything had been taken care of in a very good manner. There was nothing to worry about. And then he understood why this man could sleep through a storm. Well, can we sleep through storms? When difficulties come, are we at a state where everything is at ease with our life? Have we done what needs to be done? Have we put things in place? Has everything been taken care of? We need to work on ourselves in this way. We need to work in ourselves in a way that our anxieties are reduced. Some people are constantly creating more and more stress in their life. Some people are looking to create less and less stress in their life. Some people can handle stress. Some people can't handle stress. One of our group told me recently that one of his friends had been working in about 8 different businesses. He'd been doing startups and he was becoming unhinged by all of the things that he was doing. And he finally decided to give it all up and drive an Uber. And he said he met him after he started driving the Uber, tried to convince him to go back to what he was doing. And the man told him that he was so content doing what he was doing now, he was never going to go back. We have to find a place in our lives where we are content. Now, for some of us, that could be extremely complex, difficult things in the world. For others, it could be driving an Uber. The point is, we're not here to judge. We're here to find contentment. And each of us has to find a way to become content within the circumstances of our existence. And this shows a level of maturity. This shows what we are able to handle within the world. Maturity has nothing to do with age. Maturity has to do with attitude. Maturity has to do with the way that we react to things in the world. And for each of us, we have to blossom into this world. We have to grow into this world. We have to flower into this world. And we have to give off an odor that is a perfume to ourselves and to the rest of the world. We have to attune ourselves to doing what's appropriate, because if we do what's inappropriate for too long, it becomes who we are. And to change becomes really difficult. In the Masnavi, which is Rumi's great poem, he tells a story of a tanner. And this is a man who worked with hides. And he would make hides so they could be used for shoes. And the smell where he was terrible. And he was used to being around this smell forever. And one day he had left his tannery and was walking in the street, and he fainted. And people ran around him trying to revive him, and nobody could revive him. And finally, someone walked by who knew him and said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, he was walking in the street, he left where he works, and he fainted." He said, "Oh, I know him. He's around these horrible smells all day long. He must have smelled something beautiful and it overwhelmed him and he fainted. I have the solution. And he went and found dog feces and brought him and put it in front of the man's nose. And when he was finally able to smell something foul, he came back to himself. Do we need something foul in our lives to come back to ourselves? You know, it all has to do with the state that we're in and the state that we create for ourselves. So we have to be very careful how we tread through the world, where we go, and what we pick up. When I first met Bawa, the first day I met him, I was a young lawyer. I had been practicing for about a year. And it became very evident to me almost immediately that you could go in lots of different directions practicing law. You could do things under the cover of the law that were in effect inappropriate and could make things difficult for other people. And so this was the question that I had for him. It was essentially, how do you stay clean and practice law? And while I was sitting in front of him, he pointed to a group of papers and had somebody read them to me. And I never asked the question, but the answer was in the question. And the answer was essentially that if you want to be a jackal or a hyena, you can be a jackal or a hyena. If you want to be a man, you can be a man. Do what you do with integrity, do what you do with dignity, and things will go along smoothly. But if you give up your dignity and if you give up your integrity for results, then you're going to give up your dignity and you're going to give up your integrity for results. And you will end up being a jackal or a hyena. So as we go through life, we are constantly in flux of making a decision as to whether or not the result that we're looking for is more important than integrity, that the result that we're looking for is more important than dignity. Well, they're not. Dignity and integrity are more important than all of them. Maybe not for the world, maybe not for your status, but for yourself and for your relationship with Allah. So we, each of us, have to hold on to our dignity and to our integrity. We have to do what's right for the cause and for the sake of Allah, for the sake of God, and for the sake of our eternal soul. The rewards for doing what's right may not be noticed in this temporary, illusory world, but the rewards for doing what's right will be known to us when the appropriate time comes. So we should never let go of that. We should never let go of doing what's right. Knowing the difference between right and wrong is the touchstone of who we are. And it's at the beginning of what it is that we do. So we have to pray every day. And when we pray, what should we pray for? We should pray that we are taken on the straight path. And every one of the formal prayers begins with the Fatiha. And the Fatiha says within it, take me on the straight path. So it's already been given to us to ask for this direction, but we have to be conscious of it. It can't just be the repetition of words. We have to be conscious of the fact that there is a straight path and there is a crooked path, and that we actively choose the straight path. We choose the correct way to do things. We choose integrity and dignity over the rewards of the world. And this is what makes us pure. And this is what brings us closer to God. And this is what puts us in the company of lovers. And if we can maintain that, our maturity will grow, our wisdom will grow, our soul will be released, and we will come to know our true self. May we all come to know that and know the nature of our Creator. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.